So imagine two lines on this stark white graph.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. So the first is this steep, beautiful green line, and it's just plunging downward over the decades.
Which is usually a bad thing on a graph, but here it's actually amazing.
Exactly. It represents one of the absolute greatest health miracles of the modern era. I mean, millions of kids surviving diseases that used to be a straight-up death sentence.
It really is a breathtaking triumph of medicine and, just human coordination in general.
It totally is. But, and here is where it gets weird, right beneath it on that exact same graph is a second line.
The gray line.
Yeah, the gray line. And it is completely flat, lifeless.
Which represents the wealth of the nation.
Right. It's just hovering stubbornly in this extreme poverty range of like roughly $200 to $400. And that's for generations.
It's mind-blowing when you really look at it.
So today we are diving into basically the hardest question in global development. What actually happens the day after you save 1 million lives?
Because it completely upends the traditional post-war economic model.
How so? Like, what was the baseline assumption before this?
Well, we've operated for over half a century on this idea that a healthier population automatically becomes a wealthier population.
Right, that seems super logical.
Yeah, the logic always seemed totally bulletproof. Like, if people aren't sick, they can work longer hours.
Sure, and if children survive, families can actually plan for the future.
Exactly. They invest in education, they build human capital. Health was supposed to be this undisputed engine of economic takeoff.
But the data we're looking at today just screams the exact opposite.
It really does.
And I want to acknowledge right at the top here that we are only looking at this because of you, the listener.
Yeah, you handed us an incredibly rich, dense stack of data.
We're talking World Bank indicators, UN World Population Prospects, IMF balance of payment statistics. I mean, it's a mountain of spreadsheets.
And all of it focuses on one specific nation, Malawi.
You tasked us with a mission to decode this profound counterintuitive paradox.
The growth paradox.
Right. When this death trap is finally broken, why does a country remain stuck in the poverty mud? What is swallowing Malawi's economic growth dividend?
To figure that out, we can't just look at the health victories in a vacuum.
We have to look at the physical container, right?
Exactly. We have to examine the macro reality, the fundamental geographic and demographic baseline.
So let's dive into that. The most immediate defining characteristic that leaps out of your data is the geography.
Yeah, Malawi is a landlocked nation.
And from a macroeconomic perspective, being landlocked isn't just like a fun trivia fact.
Oh no, it's a severe structural penalty on trade.
Because without direct access to deep water ports, importing raw materials and exporting finished goods is just exceptionally expensive.
It inherently isolates the country from global manufacturing supply chains.
Which means they're deeply tethered to traditional agriculture.
Right. When integrating into global maritime trade, is that punishing? An economy naturally defaults to its own soil.
But the data reveals this crazy secondary pressure. It isn't just an agrarian economy.
No, it's an agrarian economy experiencing a staggering demographic explosion.
Yeah, on a completely fixed amount of arable land. The population density figures in the data are genuinely shocking.
They really are.
We're tracking a historical jump from roughly 39 people per square kilometer all the way up to over 220 people.
Which is an incredible acceleration.
To visualize that for you listening, imagine taking this vast open farming region and then multiplying the number of people standing on that soil by a factor of 5 or 6.
Without expanding the borders at all.
Right. Under normal economic models, when population density spikes like that, what usually happens?
Well, normally you expect a demographic flight to urban centers.
Like people leaving the crowded countryside to stack vertically in urban apartments.
Exactly. Trading agricultural tools for factory jobs or, service sector employment. Urbanization is usually the release valve.
But looking at the UN World Population Prospects in the stack, that release valve is virtually glued shut.
The rural population metrics are incredibly stubborn here.
Decades ago, the rural population share started at almost 96%. And today,
Still hovering around 83 to 84%.
and the rural population growth rate remains relentlessly high, well over 2.5% annually.
Which has a profound mathematical implication. You have roughly 94,000 square kilometers of rural land.
And that landmass is totally static.
Right. Yet the population staying in that rural setting is multiplying rapidly year after year.
So it basically functions exactly like a pressure cooker.
That's a great analogy.
You have this fixed-size pot, the land, and you're just adding more and more people into the boiling water, but the steam cannot escape into the cities.
So what happens to the land? It gets subdivided.
Right. A farmer who historically worked a 10-acre plot has, let's say, 5 children.
And because there are no urban factories to employ those children, they just stay on the farm.
So now each child inherits just 2 acres. And then they have their own kids, and those plots are sliced down into fractions of an acre.
This creates the phenomenon of microplots.
Which is terrible for wealth generation, right?
Absolutely. You shift completely away from commercial agriculture,
Yeah.
where economies of scale allow for tractors and surplus cash crops.
And you drop down to just pure, desperate subsistence survival.
The land becomes totally exhausted from overfarming. The agricultural surplus needed to generate national capital just never materializes.
Because every single calorie pulled from the dirt is immediately consumed by the family standing on it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established this baseline macro reality. It's a dense, rural, landlocked pressure cooker.
Right.
But within this incredibly constrained environment, something genuinely miraculous actually occurred in the data.
This is where we look at the raw human survival metrics.
Yeah, because we see one of the most successful public health campaigns in human history.
The decline in mortality is just staggering.
It's unbelievable. Let's pull the exact numbers on infant survival from the World Bank indicators.
Okay, historically, the infant mortality rate sat at a tragic 162.7.
Let's just pause and let that sink in for the listener. Over 16 out of every 100 babies born did not survive 12 months.
It's a devastating reality.
But tracking the data over the ensuing decades, that number plummets all the way down to 29.4.
And the under 5 mortality rate paints an even more dramatic picture.
Right. It fell from 358.9 deaths per 1,000 live births down to 38.3.
Think about that. Historically, more than 1 in 3 children didn't see their 5th birthday, and now the vast majority do.
That requires a massive logistical apparatus, doesn't it?
Massive. You're talking delivering vaccines via strict cold chains to incredibly remote villages.
Right, and distributing millions of insecticide-treated bed nets to fight malaria.
Plus, deploying community health workers to treat basic pneumonia and diarrhea.
And the data shows they didn't just conquer those traditional childhood illnesses, they actually took on one of the most terrifying biological giants of our time.
You're talking about HIV/AIDS.
Yes. The intervention data here is phenomenal. If we look at the youth incidence tracking new infections among the 15 to 24-year-olds, what does the curve do?
Well, it peaks at roughly 38,000 new infections a year.
Which is incredibly high.
But then, through highly aggressive public health policies, it's driven all the way down to just a few thousand.
How did they manage that massive drop?
The mechanics are heavily tied to the rollout of antiretroviral therapy, or RT.
Right. The data set shows RT coverage rising from effectively 0% in the early stages.
All the way up to reaching between 85 and 97% of the target population.
That is huge.
But the prevention of mother-to-child transmission, the PMT-CT coverage, that's the real standout metric to me.
Oh, for sure. Pushing toward near universal coverage there is incredible.
It means almost every pregnant woman living with HIV was identified, tested, and given the specific drugs needed to ensure her baby was born virus-free.
But a granular village-level coordination required to achieve that is almost hard to overstate. But this highlights a really crucial distinction that you brought up earlier in development economics.
Right, the difference between vertical health programs and horizontal economic development.
Explain that for the listener because it's key to the whole paradox.
Well, a vertical program is highly siloed. The international community can use official development assistance, basically foreign aid, to parachute in a specific technology.
Like a pill or a mosquito net.
Exactly. And they bypass the broader economic dysfunction to deliver a direct biological result.
So they isolated the variable of health from the variable of wealth.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the agonizing core of the paradox we're investigating.
The vertical health programs succeeded brilliantly.
The green line of mortality plunged.
But the horizontal economic development completely stalled. The gray line of wealth flatlined.
Let's look at the gross national income per capita. You pointed out we should use the Atlas method here.
Yeah, utilizing the Atlas method for GNI per capita gives us the clearest picture.
And for our listener, I'm glad we're using that instead of just raw GDP. The Atlas method is this specialized World Bank accounting tool,
Right. It applies a conversion factor that averages exchange rates over 3 years.
which smooths out wild currency fluctuations and inflation differences.
Exactly. It stops the data from looking artificially rich or artificially poor just because the local currency had a weird Tuesday.
It gives us the true lived economic reality of the average citizen.
And that reality is grim.
Yeah. The GNI per capita inches painfully from around $230 historically up to roughly $650 over decades.
When you factor in global purchasing power and inflation over a half-century, that equates to virtually zero real wealth accumulation.
The baseline of extreme poverty remained completely static, while the biological health of the population completely transformed.
And adding insult to injury, it isn't just a boring flat line.
Right, the underlying GDP growth figures reveal this violent macroeconomic roller coaster.
You highlighted a year in the data where the economy grew by an astonishing 16.7%.
Which, on paper, looks like an economic miracle, right?
Yeah, but then almost immediately, the data shows growth crashing to negative 10.2%.
A nearly 27-point swing in GDP growth over a short window. That is insane.
It's the definition of macroeconomic whiplash. It represents an incredibly fragile foundation.
And this is where I really have to push back on the classical theories.
Go for it.
If people are living longer and adults aren't dying of AIDS in their prime working years.
And families aren't dealing with the trauma and financial drain of burying infants.
Exactly. Shouldn't the economy naturally build resilience? Why is the national GDP bouncing around like a seismograph during an earthquake?
Well, because biological resilience does not automatically generate structural economic resilience.
Okay, so we're back to the pressure cooker.
Right. The economy is structured entirely around rain-fed traditional agriculture. There are no industrial buffers.
No diversified manufacturing base to export goods.
No robust service sector to absorb external shocks.
So they are entirely 100% at the mercy of the weather patterns over the agricultural grid.
Completely. If the meteorological conditions are perfect, the rains fall at the right time,
Yeah.
you hit that 16.7% growth.
The maize harvest is bountiful,
But if a drought strikes or a massive flood washes away the topsoil,
which is happening more often now with climate change, right?
exactly, then the entire national economy takes a direct, unmitigated hit. GDP plunges to negative 10.2%.
And that volatility fundamentally destroys wealth creation because building wealth requires the magic of compounding interest.
You have to take the surplus from year one, safely store it, invest it in year two.
And reap the multiplied benefits in year 3.
But if your economy takes 2 massive steps forward and then 3 catastrophic steps backward because of a drought, that compounding chain is snapped.
You're permanently rebuilding from zero.
Which brings us to the internal mechanics of the society. We need to find exactly where the potential economic energy is bleeding out.
The structural leaks.
All right, and the first massive leak is deeply embedded in the demographic data, the demographic trap.
Let's talk about that. When we cross-reference the plunging mortality rates with the fertility data, there's a glaring disconnect.
Yeah, while death rates dropped, birth rates remained incredibly elevated.
The data highlights this persistently high unmet need for contraception. Women continued having large families, but suddenly all those children were surviving.
Which triggers a profound distortion in the demographic architecture.
It creates an overwhelming youth dependency burden.
Let's visualize how this burden crushes savings. Imagine a simple scale for the listener.
Okay, a household balance sheet scale. On the income side, you have a single working-age adult, let's say a 35-year-old farmer on a microplot.
And on the liability side, you have an overwhelming number of dependents.
The data indicates youth dependency ratios frequently hovering between 79 and 90%.
Think about what that means in practical terms. A 90% youth dependency ratio means nearly the entire population is comprised of children.
Children who consume resources but can't yet produce formal economic value.
Exactly. Every single ounce of surplus value that the working-age adult produces is immediately absorbed by basic survival needs.
The scale is completely tipped. Even if that farmer has a bumper crop and makes extra money, it doesn't go into a savings account.
It doesn't go toward buying a mechanized tractor or higher yield seeds.
Right, it goes straight into raw consumption. Buying enough maize to feed 6 growing kids, basic clothing, clinic fees.
And when millions of households are structurally prevented from building a financial cushion,
the nation as a whole is prevented from building one.
National savings rates remain abysmal. And without national savings, there is no domestic capital pool.
Banks have no local deposits to lend out to entrepreneurs who want to build a factory or a logistics network.
The sheer demographic weight of the youth population basically vacuums up all potential capital before it can ever be deployed for growth.
Which totally forces us to reevaluate the popular political rhetoric we always hear.
You mean about the youth dividend?
Yeah. Economists are always touting the demographic dividend as this guaranteed engine for future economic explosion.
Well, it's only a dividend if those youths eventually transition into a highly productive, wage-earning workforce.
A workforce that generates more value than it consumes?
Right. But during the transition phase, while they are entirely dependent, it is not a dividend. It is a profound burden.
And if they age into adulthood without acquiring the skills for high-wage jobs, that dividend never actually materializes.
It simply shifts from a youth dependency burden to an adult unemployment crisis.
Oof. Which perfectly bridges into the next crucial layer of our data stack: human capital.
Because it isn't just about keeping these kids biologically alive.
Right, it's about what happens to their brains once they survive. Let's look at the education data, which is actually kind of an optical illusion at first glance.
The primary school enrollment figures are a prime example of that.
Yeah, if you just glance at the World Bank indicators for primary school gross enrollment, you might think, wow, the system is functioning perfectly.
Because the data often exceeds 100% enrollment.
Which mathematically seems impossible, right? But what does that actually imply?
A gross enrollment rate over 100% means the system has absorbed all the age-appropriate kids, plus a massive influx of overage students starting late.
So it signals this massive, commendable societal appetite for education. The families really want their kids in school.
But then you trace those children through the education funnel.
And the data becomes absolutely heartbreaking.
When we look at lower secondary completion and progression rates, the numbers fall off a cliff.
We see completion rates plummeting down into the 20 to 40% range.
The kids are pouring into the top of the funnel in primary school, but the vast majority vanish before they get a high school education.
Why the massive drop-off? What's happening in those classrooms?
It's a concept development economists call learning poverty.
The fundamental difference between physically sitting at a desk and actually acquiring knowledge.
Exactly. The data paints a picture of a system totally overwhelmed by its own demographic success.
Classrooms are severely overcrowded.
Pupil-to-teacher ratios are unmanageable, and there's a critical absence of basic learning materials, like textbooks.
So it's entirely possible for a child to sit in a classroom for 5 years, pass the attendance checks, and still not know how to read a basic paragraph.
Or perform simple arithmetic. They've survived the lethal diseases of childhood. They are physically present.
But they are trapped in profound learning poverty.
They aren't acquiring the functional literacy or critical thinking skills required to participate in a modern workforce.
Let's really synthesize the gravity of this for a second. Surviving childhood is merely step one.
Right.
If the school system operates as a leaky funnel, discarding the majority of students before they achieve literacy, you end up engineering an entire generation that is biologically healthy but economically obsolete.
You cannot run a technology sector or an advanced manufacturing plant if your youth demographic is dropping out before secondary school.
And this data begs an immediate super practical question. If the majority of these surviving youths are not in secondary school, where are they?
The labor statistics answer that with brutal clarity.
Yeah. The statistic that absolutely stopped me in my tracks here is the child labor data.
It is the inevitable, tragic consequence of the structural pressures we've been talking about.
The shrinking farm plots, the lack of savings, the leaky education funnel.
The data reveals that among economically active 7 to 14-year-olds, a staggering majority,
Roughly 71.2%, right?
yeah, over 70% are swallowed up by the agricultural sector.
They aren't in a classroom preparing for the global economy. They're out in the dirt working the soil alongside their parents just to meet daily caloric needs.
It perfectly illustrates the agonizing irony of the growth paradox.
You possess a workforce that is healthier than any generation before it.
They aren't dying of malaria.
But because the only employment available is low-yield subsistence farming on a shrinking microplot,
Their improved health does not translate into higher national GDP.
they are just applying that health to the exact same manual, low-value labor their great-grandparents performed.
The macroeconomic structure acts as an impenetrable ceiling on their human potential.
And the national-level data totally confirms this industrial stagnation.
If we examine the value added by industry, which includes manufacturing, construction, utilities,
It has remained remarkably flat. hovering stubbornly in the 17 to 19% range for decades.
That is the missing link. Despite the billions in health aid, the fundamental blueprint of the economy remained frozen.
Malawi just didn't experience that classic structural transformation from agriculture to manufacturing.
The kind of transformation that defined explosive wealth generation in places like East Asia.
So without an industrial revolution to absorb these newly healthy youths, the labor market defaulted to the only sector that could physically hold them,
The dirt.
which just adds more hands to the same small plots of land. It's a holding pattern.
But unfortunately, it isn't even a stable holding pattern.
No, the data shows this survival strategy is actively destroying long-term wealth.
Let's look at the invisible wealth destroyers, the environmental and monetary data.
We've talked a lot about what the economy is failing to do, but we need to look at how it's actively liquidating the assets it does possess.
Right.
I pulled this fascinating data point regarding net forest depletion.
It's a critical metric.
The data shows net forest depletion ranging up to 6 to 8% of GNI in certain years. That is a massive chunk of national income tied directly to cutting down the country's own trees.
To understand the mechanism here, we have to revisit adjusted net savings.
Because standard GDP accounting can be dangerously misleading here, right?
Very misleading. From a
Yeah.
pure short-term GDP perspective, a rural farmer cutting down a protected forest, turning the wood into charcoal, and selling it by the road looks like positive economic activity.
It generates cash today. It ticks the nominal GDP upward.
But adjusted net savings forces us to account for the depreciation of natural capital,
Factoring in the loss of the forest's future value.
the degradation of the soil that follows deforestation, the carbon damage.
When you include all that, the true wealth creation is often deeply negative.
The charcoal seller made a few dollars today, but the nation lost thousands of dollars in long-term ecological viability.
They are literally burning their furniture to keep the house warm.
The pressure cooker leaves them no choice.
And while the environment is being physically liquidated, there is a secondary invisible force liquidating their monetary wealth.
Inflation.
The GDP deflator figures in the dataset are terrifying.
The macroeconomic imbalances naturally breed severe monetary instability.
There are years where the inflation metric spikes over 60%, even hitting 77.2%.
For our listener, the GDP deflator is the broadest measure of inflation.
It tracks price changes of all domestically produced goods, right?
Right. The 77.2% spike means the purchasing power of the currency is essentially vaporizing in real time.
It's devastating. I always conceptualize inflation as this invisible hand picking the pockets of the poorest citizens.
It's particularly cruel to the vulnerable.
Think about our rural farmer again. Let's say they manage to defy all the odds. They survive the demographic trap, they have a great harvest, they save a tiny bit of cash.
They hide a stack of kwacha under their mattress to pay for their kids' school fees next year.
But a 70% inflation rate means that by the time they pull that money out 12 months later, it is practically worthless.
It can barely buy a fraction of what it could the year before.
It completely and utterly destroys the incentive to save.
Why defer consumption today if the money will be worthless tomorrow?
And remember, national savings are already suffocated by the youth dependency burden.
So whatever tiny fraction of savings does miraculously survive the demographic trap,
Is immediately evaporated by the inflation trap. It's a double whammy on domestic capital formation.
and that destruction extends to the formal private sector too. High, volatile inflation paralyzes domestic investment.
If you're a local entrepreneur, you can't project future revenues.
You can't borrow money at reasonable interest rates.
You can't sign long-term supply contracts if the value of the currency is wildly unpredictable.
It disincentivizes long-term industrial planning and locks the entire society right back into a day-to-day survival mindset.
Okay, so if the internal engine of wealth creation is totally broken, if savings are impossible, inflation is destroying purchasing power, and the environment is being liquidated.
How is the state even functioning?
Exactly. How do they build roads or keep the lights on in the ministries?
This brings us to the external lifeline.
The data on official development assistance, or ODA, is staggering. The reliance is just massive.
Because the domestic engine is stalled, the system is entirely dependent on external energy.
The data set indicates that in some years, net ODA acts as a huge percentage, sometimes exceeding 40% of the country's gross capital formation.
And just to clarify capital formation, that is the money used to build the physical assets of a nation.
The bridges, hospitals, power plants.
Right. For a developed nation, that's funded by domestic savings and taxes. Here, it is largely funded by foreign aid.
It acts as an external blood transfusion, keeping the state apparatus alive.
But it isn't all just grants and free money. There is a severe debt component,
Yeah, the data tracks long-term public debt and multilateral debt service climbing aggressively. The obligations are growing.
which compresses the fiscal space even further.
But looking at all this external cash leads me to the absolute hardest question of this entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
You have billions of dollars in international aid flowing in over decades. You have the undeniable success of the health interventions.
Right.
With all of this capital and human survival, why hasn't the government been able to build the factories, the processing plants, the infrastructure needed to permanently transform the economy?
To answer that, we have to look objectively at the worldwide governance indicators included in the data stack.
And we're approaching this not as political commentary, but as pure statistical observation.
We are just reading the data points on the board. The indicators measure the functional environment in which economic activity occurs.
They provide percentiles for metrics like institutional efficiency, regulatory quality, rule of law, anti-corruption.
And historically, the data places Malawi in the lower percentiles for these categories.
Often fluctuating between the 20th and 40th percentiles globally.
Right. So what does a low percentile in regulatory quality actually mean for a real-world economy?
Yeah, how does that translate on the ground?
It translates to severe institutional friction. Consider the difference between delivering a health outcome and delivering an economic outcome.
Okay.
The reason the infant mortality and HIV interventions were so spectacularly successful is that international NGOs can largely bypass domestic bureaucratic bottlenecks.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
An international organization can purchase 1 million mosquito nets, load them onto trucks, and hand them directly to mothers in rural clinics.
It's a highly targeted, localized delivery of a discrete product.
Exactly. You do not need a perfectly functioning Ministry of Finance to hand out a mosquito net.
That makes perfect sense. The health miracle was essentially a logistics operation layered over the existing system.
But you cannot bypass the state to build a broad-based modern economy.
Right. If a foreign direct investor wants to build a $50 million textile plant to employ thousands of youths.
They require deep institutional capacity. They need a stable regulatory environment, transparent procurement processes, clear land titling,
Reliable power grids managed by competent utilities.
and a judicial system capable of enforcing complex contracts.
And if the institutional quality is sitting in the 20th percentile,
The investor simply walks away.
they take their capital elsewhere.
The institutional friction, the bureaucratic inefficiency, the shifting regulations wastes the economic potential of the health dividend.
The aid money and potential investment come in, but they are dissipated by the friction of the system.
Before they can be converted into permanent, wealth-generating industrial infrastructure, good health can be siloed. Economic transformation requires the entire machinery of the state to operate smoothly.
Okay, this is profound. We've navigated through the macro geography, the health successes, the economic volatility, the demographic transition trap,
Learning poverty, child labor, environmental liquidation, hyperinflation.
and institutional friction. That is a massive array of separate variables. We really need to tie this all together into a cohesive model for you, the learner.
We need a grand analogy. And honestly, a biological metaphor is far more accurate than mechanical models here.
Okay, let's build this for the listener. Let's view the entire macroeconomic system of the nation as a human body.
Over the last 50 years, the international community, alongside incredible domestic health workers, have acted as the world's greatest external immune system.
They pumped this body full of advanced medicine, vaccines, and antiretrovirals.
They defeated the viruses. They fortified the immune system to an unprecedented degree.
So as a result, the body is biologically resilient. The millions of surviving youths represent this massive caloric energy flowing into the organism.
But here is the catastrophic failure. While the immune system was perfectly fortified, the digestive system, which represents the national economy, was completely neglected.
The body is taking in massive amounts of energy, but the digestive system is fundamentally incapable of processing those calories.
Because of the demographic trap and learning poverty, the calories are empty. They lack the skills needed to build muscle.
The reliance on traditional agriculture means there is no physical mechanism to convert that energy into productive power. The energy just sits in the fields.
Hyperinflation and environmental depletion act as parasites, draining whatever small amounts of nutrients the system does absorb.
And finally, the weak governance means the central nervous system cannot coordinate the body's movements to build shelter or plant better crops.
The brain is sending signals that get lost in the bureaucratic noise.
The conclusion of this metaphor is just sobering. You've engineered a body capable of surviving the harshest threats, but it is economically starving to death.
It cannot build muscle. It cannot grow.
The GNI per capita remains emaciated because the health miracle was inserted into an economic anatomy that couldn't metabolize it.
Right. But the data paints a stark picture, and it doesn't just diagnose the disease, it outlines the cure.
Let's move to the blueprint for the future. Based on this exhaustive analysis of the data stack, what is the data-driven path forward?
The entire paradigm of global development must evolve. We need 3 massive strategic shifts to redesign the economic digestive system.
Let's construct these solutions based on the bottlenecks we've identified. Shift number 1 has to address the top of the funnel.
Shift number 1 is transitioning from survival to empowerment.
Because for a half-century, the global priority was, quite rightly, just keeping kids alive.
But the data proves that mere survival is insufficient. The billions of dollars in political will that achieved the health miracle must now be aggressively pivoted toward human capital development.
We must shift from delivering vaccines to delivering high-quality, measurable classroom instruction.
We have to break the back of learning poverty. That means building schools, but more importantly, training teachers.
Providing textbooks, ensuring every child progressing to secondary school has functional literacy and numeracy.
We have to get the 71.2% of kids out of the agricultural fields and into a functioning education funnel.
But even if we perfectly educate them, if they just graduate and return to a shrinking 2-acre farm,
We haven't solved the core paradox, which necessitates shift number 2.
moving from traditional agriculture to industrial upgrading,
The rural pressure cooker cannot sustain the demographic math. The government and international partners must push toward light manufacturing, agro-processing, and service sectors.
the economy must create urban wage labor that can actually absorb that massive newly educated youth population.
You have to build the factories to employ the kids you just spent a decade educating.
It requires a structural transformation of the labor market. But to build factories, you need investors, and for investors, you need a functioning nervous system.
Leading to shift number 3, transitioning from external blood transfusions to institutional blood generation.
The deep reliance on official development assistance is a trap.
The country must transition away from foreign aid dependency toward building robust, transparent domestic institutions.
This is the unglamorous, grinding work of nation building. It means creating a governance structure capable of collecting domestic taxes fairly,
Managing monetary policy to crush inflation.
enforcing business contracts reliably, and curbing corruption.
It requires building the boring, vital machinery of a modern state so that capital can confidently build the infrastructure of the future.
Educate the population to generate skilled human capital, build an industrial base to absorb that capital, and establish a strong institutional framework to protect it.
Only then will the health dividend finally translate into a wealth dividend.
This has been an absolutely phenomenal journey through the numbers. To you, the learner, I want to say a massive thank you for providing such a profound, complex stack of data.
It forced us to look way beyond the surface-level narratives of international development.
We started by looking at 2 lines on a graph, one green line showing a beautiful plunge in mortality, and a gray line showing a frustrating, stagnant, flat line of income.
And the health miracle was a beautiful, necessary achievement. Morally, ethically, and scientifically, deploying those resources was the absolute right thing to do.
But the data unequivocally proves that medicine alone cannot cure poverty. It only changes the biological conditions under which poverty is experienced.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a new, provocative dilemma that this data points toward, but doesn't explicitly measure.
We focus entirely on what happens inside the borders of Malawi, but ponder the broader geopolitical implications.
It is the ultimate unintended consequence of uneven development.
What happens when you have a massive, incredibly healthy, biologically resilient, and highly connected youth population that eventually realizes the promised wealth dividend is never arising?
If the economic digestive system remains broken, and millions of capable youths are permanently disenfranchised,
Does this demographic pressure cooker inevitably lead to the greatest wave of economic and climate migration the globe has ever seen?
the data stops at the national border. But human ambition, the desire for a better life,
And the drive to utilize one's own human capital absolutely do not. Thank you for sparking such a profound, deep dive. Keep questioning the data, keep looking at the interconnected systems, and we will keep unpacking it with you.